Hi, boys and girls. We are here for lesson 15. The title of this lesson is called Interpreting Allegories in Fantasy Stories. And I know the first time I looked at this, I was like, allegory? Wow, this is fifth grade. But as I got to reading this lesson, I realized that you are able to do this. These are things that are happening around you, and you're able to do this lesson. So let's go ahead and get started. We've already talked about how characters in fantasies face dragons, both literal and metaphorically, meaning that there are dangerous things in their lives that they need to battle. Sometimes it is an actual dragon, but sometimes it's just something bad. So since everything in a fantasy story can be and is often invented by the author, many authors take the opportunity to make sure most things have multiple meanings. A lot of these stories are actually teaching real lessons. That real life lesson. That's the word. Allegory. Allegory, life lesson. Okay? It's a story that seems to be about one thing, but it's hiding a moral or a political message. Okay? So here comes the great big post-it note of everything. Today, I want to teach you that fantasy readers can gain new insights into the real world by finding, understanding, and interpreting the metaphors and allegories that exist in fantasy. So you can do that by noticing characters, object, setting, and creatures that might have multiple meanings. Okay? So here's a little anchor chart that we would be gluing in if we were in class today. And this shows you a metaphor. It says when two things that are unalike are compared to make a point. Sometimes these things are not directly compared, but they're referred to. So her homework was an ogre waiting to devour her. So the two things that are being compared here is homework and ogre. Okay? That's a metaphor comparing two things that aren't related. An allegory is a story or other artwork that seems to be about one thing, but is hiding a message, often a moral or a political one. Like the emperor's new clothes. That's an allegory about power and vanity and foolishness. Because remember, there was nothing to his clothing. All right. Metaphors and allegories can be a way for the author to comment on the real world, as well as for the readers to decide if we agree or disagree with the author's take on that situation or issue. So I'm going to skip over to The Thief of Always. I'm going to look back at chapter number 4. So we're going to go back a long ways because we're on chapter 24 now. Let's look back at our book, The Thief of Always, and identify a place that the author might be using an allegory. Remember, that's a life lesson, or a metaphor. And let me go ahead and pull up my allegory. Okay, remember, an allegory is like you've got this secret message, but then a metaphor is when you're comparing two things that are not alike. Okay? And I'm just going to read this part to Wendell Hamilton III. Okay? The sun came to wake him soon after dawn. A straight white dart of light laid on his lids. He sat up with a start, wondering for a moment what bed this was, what room, what house. Then his memories of the previous day returned, and he realized he had slept through from late afternoon to early morning. The rest had strengthened him. He felt energetic, and with a whoop of pleasure, he jumped out of bed and got dressed. The house was more welcoming than ever today. The flowers Miss Griffin had set on every table and sill, singing with color. The front door stood open, and sliding down the gleaming banisters, Harvey raced out onto the porch to inspect the morning. A surprise awaited him. The trees, which had been heavy with leaves the previous afternoon, had shed their canopies. There were new tiny buds on every branch and twig, as though this were the first day of spring. "Another day, another dollar," said Wendell, ambling around the corner of the house. "What does that mean?" said Harvey. "That's what my father used to say all the time. Another day, another dollar." He's a banker, my dad, and I'm Wendell Hamilton II. And me, I'm Wendell Hamilton III. So let's look at this book and see if we can come up with some allegories or some things that are being compared. Okay, so one thing I noticed, it talked about the sun coming up. And to me, it's like a new day. The sun's coming up. You've got new hope. Okay, the next one that, as I was reading, they were talking about the door being open and sliding down the banister. To me, that just signifies freedom. All of these things, talking about these trees that have been heavy with leaves, and now they have these tiny buds. To me, this whole section makes it sound like Harvey has no worries. So fantasy isn't all just about made-up imaginary stuff for our entertainment only. It's a genre that's usually showing us again and again that it has something to teach us about our real world and lives. Think of what happens in the next 20 chapters to Harvey. This chapter is very light, very carefree. Remember, he started out in The Great Gray Beast of February, where everything was sad and everything was depressing and lonely. And now he has not a care in the world, or so he thinks. So today, as you read for your 20 minutes, consider the ways your novels are reflecting on the world. And as you're digging into your text, you might actually be meeting some of your goals that you set for yourself as a reader. For example, when you think about metaphors, you're also thinking about the author's choice of phrases as well as symbolism. Okay, so your job as a reader is to think about what you're thinking when you're reading. Why do you think that? What part of the text made you think that? Okay. Continue reading with the lens of a metaphor and an allegory. This time, take the time to mark a particular section of your text that stands out for you, and then take a few minutes to jot down your thoughts on what that metaphor or allegory could mean. So you can see how I've found this page on my book. So I'm going to come back to right here on my paper, and I'm just going to write down the page numbers, page 32 and 33. Harvey's first day. First full day, I guess. And this very first day, here's where I'm going to put my little post-it notes. The sun's up. He's got new hope. The door's open. He's sliding down the banisters. He doesn't have a worry. Okay, so your paper's going to look something similar to this, where you have like page numbers, because I don't want you to copy the entire book. Page numbers, and then what were some symbols, some allegories, some metaphors that you saw as you were reading. Happy reading, boys and girls.